Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It is a rainy Saturday morning here in Georgia. Happy holidays, everybody. It is a week before Christmas. For those of you that celebrate Christmas, I don't. But happy holidays to those of you who do. This is your time of the year, so I celebrate you. So I am Tamara Shealey, y'all. You know, today is the third Saturday of the month. We always have Mr. Reggie Jackson, y'all, award-winning journalist. Mr. Reggie Jackson is in the house. Let's see. There he is. Good morning, Mr. Reggie.
Good morning, Tamara. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Look, we feel it. I said we was feeling the ancestors this morning. We all ethnic, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Woke up on the same page this morning.
There it is. Mr. Reggie Jackson, y'all, award-winning journalist. This man always speaks truth to power. He has this tagline. I'm probably gonna butcher it. I should know it by now, Mr. Reggie. Say it straight, or it's gonna come out crooked. Did I say it right? You say it.
Say it straight, or it comes out crooked.
Y'all, Mr. Reggie Jackson, for those of you that follow this broadcast, you know he's been with me before. This man does not hold back. And guess what, y'all? At the end of this broadcast today, we have a special surprise. I'm not going to even tell you what it is. This will be your Christmas present, y'all. For those of you that celebrating Christmas, this is going to be your gift. This is going to be a gift that keeps on giving. I think that's what they say, Mr. Reggie.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you and I have been talking offline a lot. I'm excited about what's to come. Again, I'm not going to tell y'all. I'm just going to keep dropping little hints because at the end of the broadcast, y'all going to be real excited. Mr. Reggie, white backlash. You know, the last time you were here, we talked about the psychological effects on us, the things that are happening to us as a people. Prior to that, we've talked about critical race theory. But today you wanted to dive into the white backlash. So let me tell you my brief story, Mr. Reggie, before you get this party started. I ran in 2018. You know, I've run for office 5 times consecutively. 5 times, y'all. The first time I ran, the second got 37%. Second time, 43.8%. Your girl never had any money, but I know how to work my butt off. I work, y'all, hard. That third race was going to be a win, and everybody knew it. From 37% to 43.8%, that third race was going to be a win, Mr. Reggie. I get to the third race, and I experience my version of white backlash. Now, I'm black. I've been black all my life, Mr. Reggie, but all of a sudden, I became the black candidate in this white, predominantly at that time, white district. I was black in 2018 when I wasn't black in 2014 and 2016. But 2018, I became this black candidate. So I experienced this white backlash where a white woman was put in the race by operatives inside the Democratic Party to run against me because they felt like she was more electable. Now, after your girl had done work this district. So I know white backlash. So they, you know, after supporting me 2 times prior, when a white woman gets in the race, we hands off. We're gonna, you know, the white backlash. And they came for me. I'm like, if it had been warranted, if I had done something prior, I expected the white backlash. But I didn't understand it. And I did understand it. And I didn't understand it. It broke my heart, but it did not break my spirit because you know where we at today on this campaign trail to the United States Senate. So God knew, but I'm gonna let you dive into white backlash and what that all looks like. So thank you for joining us on the broadcast today.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you and your audience again, Tamara. Listen, this is just the latest version of the white backlash. We've seen white backlashes throughout American history, and I want to just kind of talk about where this one is and specifics of it, because I keep hearing people say over and over again, and I completely disagree with them, oh, America's more divided than it's ever been before. This is what they're literally saying, Tamara. America has always been divided. We as people of color know America has been divided because we've been on one side of a line, and most Americans that are white have been on the other side of the line throughout American history. You know, you talk to Native Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, you know, people in our community, we know that there's that line, and we're always on the same side. Most of us are. You know, we got some turncoats that'll go over to the other side, but that's always going to be the case, right? So what we're seeing isn't a divided America. What we're seeing is a divided white America. White America is more divided than it's ever been before, because last year, after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery were all murdered, we started to talk about something out loud that we had never talked about before, and that's systemic racism. America had never had a conversation about systemic racism. People were even afraid to even say the term systemic racism. And so what that did is it led to a lot of white people crossing that line for the first time in their lives. And, you know, I can remember after George Floyd was murdered, I have a friend, a black guy from Mississippi who lives out in Salt Lake City, Utah, of all places. And one of my cousins is good friends with him. And he's like, yeah, I talked to my buddy today. And he's like, man, they protested out in Salt Lake City. I'm like, what? Wait a minute, it ain't that many black people in Salt Lake City, so it must be some white people protesting. And then I heard on the news that they're protesting in North Dakota. I'm like, North Dakota? Now I know it's very few brothers and sisters in North Dakota. So I was like, man, this is actually white people protesting. And eventually we all saw it. These protests spread across the country, across the world, right? People in countries that probably couldn't even find the U.S. on a map were protesting because of what happened, particularly after George Floyd video came out. So what you started to see was a lot of white folks that all of a sudden became woke. And it was like, listen, black people have been telling us these stories about police brutality for years, and we've been doubting it. But listen, we got this viral video of this man begging for his mama, literally begging for his mama in the last moments of his life, saying time and time again that he couldn't breathe. And I haven't watched the video. I refuse to watch the George Floyd video. I've seen enough of these snuff films, Tamara. I don't need to see any more black people get murdered on video. I've seen enough of them. I watched Eric Garner. I've watched a lot of these. I can't watch them anymore. It's too traumatizing. But I've read about it. I've heard what people have said about it. But this is what happened. That video, what was special about that video of George Floyd was that you couldn't help, from what people I know that watched it, they said you couldn't help but to become exceptionally emotional and like really feel horrible for this man, particularly when he's begging for his mama, right? So that touched the hearts of a lot of white people that had refused to allow those types of things to touch them before, because they always made an excuse, like when Eric Garner was getting choked to death. Well, you know, he was resisting arrest. Well, George Floyd wasn't resisting anything. He was trying to save his life by being as calm as possible. So people couldn't make that argument that, well, he was resisting arrest. He wasn't following orders. The stuff that they usually say when police kill black people, they always make an excuse and say, well, you know, if they would have done this instead of that, they still be alive, which is a bunch of nonsense. But that's a whole nother topic. But what it did is it made white people say, man, we on the wrong side of history here. We got to switch over. We got to start advocating and letting black people know that, listen, we support Black Lives Matter movement. And all of that stuff spread in white communities all over the country. Now, me being here in Wisconsin, people who aren't from Wisconsin don't know that Wisconsin is a very white state. 85% of the residents of Wisconsin are white. Blacks only represent 6.7% of the residents in the whole state of Wisconsin. And 60% of us live in the city of Milwaukee. Almost all black people live in about 5 cities in the state of Wisconsin. So when I travel around the state,
look,
yeah, we
6.7%
of the population of Wisconsin is black. 60% of all the black people live in the state live in one city, Milwaukee. The only state that has one city that has a higher percentage of all blacks living in the state in one place is New York State. New York City has a higher percentage of black people, you know, that are part of the population of the state living in one city. So 60% of us live in Milwaukee, right? But I travel all around the state, you know, doing the work that I do. I've been all over the state. I've been in 50 different communities, you know, very, very white communities around the state, talking to people about these things. And what I've heard from a lot of white people, because they keep inviting me to come to these places, Tamara, they're not afraid of hearing the truth. That's what people don't want you to believe. They want you to believe that, well, white people don't want to talk about racism and race and all this other stuff. They do. They want to learn because now they're woke. And they're like, man, we need to learn a lot more about what's going on. We need to learn a lot more about American history. And so white people are like, they're ingesting this information. They're buying books and they're watching podcasts and they're watching your show. They're doing stuff that they never would have done before. And that's the change that's happened. We've never seen anything like this. So we go back to the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement. If you go back and you pay very close attention to the civil rights movement and you look at the images and the video from the civil rights movement, there were some white people that was there to support us. You know, some white people lost their lives. You know, several prominent murders during the civil rights movement were white people who lost their lives. You know, the two young men who lost their life in Mississippi as part of the Mississippi burning case when Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were killed. You know, the prominent case of Viola Liuzzo, who was murdered because she was driving in a car with a black man in Alabama. And so we know that there were white people that were supporters, but when you go back and you look, you see there wasn't a whole lot of them. It was some, but it wasn't a whole lot of them. But when you look at the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests around the country last year, you see a boatload of white people. So that's where the division has come in. And as a result of that, white people now are having conversations with their family members, their friends, their neighbors, their bowling buddies, you know, their colleagues at work that they never had before. And a lot of white people are not happy about it, Tamara. They're like, man, I don't want to talk about that stuff. I don't want to talk about Black Lives Matter. I don't want to talk about racism. I don't want to talk about systemic racism. So that's where the divide is coming. And as a result of that divide, as a result of that boatload of white people crossing that line for the first time ever, you got a backlash. You got people that saying, we got to do something about this. We got to pull those white people back over to the right side of the line. And so whenever we make progress in terms of even having conversations about racism, somebody is going to create a mechanism to create a backlash. And that's what we're dealing with. So when you hear all of these conversations that you hear in the news about, you know, people are fighting against critical race theory in schools and all this other nonsense that they're talking about, they're not fighting against critical race theory. They're fighting because white people are saying, we need to talk about this in our schools. We need to inform our children what true American history is, because we've been lying to them their entire lives. They lied to me. They lied to you. They lied to everybody in American history class. And so because of that, some people are very nervous, Tamara, because now people are going to be like, wait a minute. We as a nation have not been very good to Black people. There's a lot of evidence that we've been very bad to Black people in the past. And in the present, we're still being very bad to Black people. So the backlash is saying, like, listen, no, systemic racism is a myth. You know, that's fake news. This isn't real. You know, they're trying to say that critical race theory, oh, that's a Marxist, you know, philosophy. You know, anytime they want to criticize a philosophy in America, they attach it to Karl Marx and they say that's socialist, that's Marxist, whatever, right? Because Americans have, for whatever reason, going back to the early 1900s, have been against socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it. And whenever they need to, they pull it, they go to that drawer. You know, everybody got like that junk drawer in their house, right? They go to that junk drawer and they pull out, oh, Marxism. Okay, let's throw Marxism at people and claim that critical race theory is Marxist, right? Now, there are some Marxist principles behind it, obviously, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing necessarily, but Americans think it is. So this is what they're doing. They're trying to tell people that, listen, if we teach this history that these Black folks and Native Americans want us to teach in school, then our little white children are going to feel guilty in school. They're going to feel like, man, my grandfather, my great-grandfather were these oppressors. Well, guess what? They were oppressors. They were oppressors and they're still oppressors. They've created systems that perpetuate oppression, whether people want to believe it or not. And so this backlash is saying, listen, if white people don't learn these things, then they won't believe that systemic racism is real. They won't believe that white people have been in a situation where they've been oppressing people of color. That's what they're trying to stop. They're trying to stop white people from learning to mirror. They're not trying to stop us. They're not trying to stop us from having the conversations, because we're going to keep having the conversations. They don't want white people having those conversations because there's this fear that we'll actually start doing what's right when it comes to people of color. We'll actually start treating them the way that they deserve to be treated. That's what this current backlash is all about. Like, man, we've had too many white people that have turned and went to the other side of the line. They over there with the Black folks. You know what they used to call them back in the day, the white people that crossed over the line. We're not even going to say the real word out loud, but they call them the in-lovers, right? They're not calling them that today. They calling them something completely different, but that's what they mean.
You preaching, Mr. Reggie. You preaching this morning. All I could hear was retaliation. That's what I heard. Like, but
Exactly.
every time we take one step and we are at some place where we are bridging this divide, it's retaliation. Like, that's what I could hear in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said earlier, this is not something that's new in America. This happens all the time. You know, I want to go back and give several examples of when we've had white backlashes in the past. And these white backlashes are always related to some level of progress that Black people have made,
Mhm.
and some level of white people having the mindset that they believe that Black people should have something that they didn't have before, and then people react to it in a very bad way. And in many cases, and we're seeing this now, some of that backlash is going to have some violence attached to it, because it's always had violence attached to it. So let's kind of go back to the first real heavy white backlash against Black people progress. We got to go back to the 1800s. Go back to 1861, when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Now, people will tell you that the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, was the anti-slavery party. They were not the anti-slavery party. What they were was the anti-extension of slavery party, which meant that they didn't care about the states that had slavery. They wanted to make sure that additional new states that were added to the Union did not have slavery on the books. That's what the Republican Party, that's what their platform. If you go back and read it, and read the conversations they were having, that's what they were talking about. They didn't have a problem with slavery existing necessarily. They didn't like it. They said it was bad, but they didn't want it to extend. And the reason they didn't want it to extend, Tamara, wasn't because it was this horrible institution. I mean, Lincoln said, you know, there was an event where he saw some Black people were enslaved being treated very badly, and he hated the institution, which is true. But this was the bottom line. The way the founding fathers set up the federal government, you may have heard of the 3/5 clause of the Constitution, right? So when they said, okay, how do we determine, who is going to be in the House of Representatives from each state? Well, we're going to base it on populations, right? So the states that have a larger population will have more members of the House of Representatives representing them in Congress in Washington, D.C., right? So, of course, the southern states, Mississippi, South Carolina in particular, where a majority of the people eventually would be Black people, enslaved Black people. They knew that if they weren't able to count some of those Black people or all of the Black people in the state, then they were going to lose out on power in the House of Representatives. So they said, listen, we know that these Black people are not citizens. We know that we're enslaving them. We know we treat them like garbage, but we want to count some of them, at least for our benefit. And so they compromised, and they eventually said, listen, we'll count 3 out of every 5 Black person as part of the population to determine our representation in the House of Representatives. So they literally turned every Black person into 3/5 of a person. And that is built into the Constitution. That is built into the way that the Electoral College system works, right? So from the very beginning, the benefit of Black people was that it helped give white people political power. And so it helped those Southerners, and in many instances, it helped the Northerners who said, listen, that means 2/5 of the population of those states won't be counted. So we're benefiting a little bit. So it was kind of, both sides got a little bit of what they wanted. So the North said, well, they're not counting all the Black people. And the South was like, well, we're not counting all of them, but at least we count 3 out of every 5. So it was benefit to both sides. And so what happens as a result of that is that we have a system when the Republican Party is created, and most people don't know this, the first meeting that led to the Republican Party actually happened right here in good old Wisconsin back in the 1840s. That's where the kind of the birthplace of the Republican Party, the original Republican Party, was here in Wisconsin. So, okay, so Lincoln is running. He wins election. Now, Lincoln has said that he hates slavery, but he's not intending on doing anything about it as president. He says, I don't think that I have the power as president to do anything about it, because this is what people don't get. All of the slavery laws, Tamara, every single one of the laws that made slavery legal was a state law. There was no federal law that made slavery legal. It was state laws, right? So Massachusetts was the first state to create a law that said slavery is a legal institution, and then other states, all of the original 13 colonies had slavery laws on the books. the last of those was a good state you live in, Georgia. When Georgia became a state, it became a slaving state immediately when it became a state, right? So what happens is Lincoln said, I can't really do anything about slavery because these are states' laws, right? So the people who were part of the Democratic Party didn't believe him, particularly the people that were in these southern states, these 15 slaving states. They said, we don't believe Lincoln. We think he's going to mess around with our institution. Right. And so what they did is they started to gather and have conversations. Even before the election, they had these conversations, Tamara. Before Lincoln actually won the election, they had conversations like, well, what's going to happen if Lincoln wins? What are we going to do? Right. So they started to have conversations about, listen, if Lincoln wins and they try to mess with slavery, we're going to leave the Union. We're not going to be a part of it anymore. We're going to break away. We're going to secede from the Union because they said we have the right to do it. You know, we join the Union, we have a right to leave the Union. So they started to have these conversations. Lincoln won the election, and South Carolina was the first state that said we're seceding from the Union. We're no longer a part of the United States of America. And then Mississippi and Georgia and Kentucky and Alabama, well, not Kentucky, they didn't join the Confederacy, but Texas, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, 11 states joined the Confederate States of America. And this is the thing about it. When they lie to you in school and they say the Civil War was about states' rights, it wasn't about slavery, it's a lie. Today, it was a lie back then. It's always been a lie, because if you go back and you can read the letters of secession that the states wrote saying why they were leaving, Mississippi basically came right out and said, we're leaving to protect this institution of slavery because this is what, our bread and butter is slavery. Without slavery, we're nothing, right? So this is an interesting thing that happened just recently. I've been working on writing an exhibit about Civil War for America's Black Holocaust Museum that's going to reopen in February. So as I was doing the research, months ago, I had found a website that had a list of all of the secession documents from all of the 13 states that drew up secession documents to leave the Union, right? It was a website. It was very nice. It had very detailed. You could go there and you can look at. And me thinking that this would be here forever because it's the internet and stuff never leaves the internet. I said, well, I'm going to just bookmark this and come back and use it as a resource later. So 2 weeks ago, Tamara, I go back to that website to help me pull some language out for this exhibit I'm writing. And guess what? The website is there, but none of that stuff is there anymore. I'm like, what happened to the website? All that stuff is gone. It's like, this is a valuable, firsthand primary source documents. They were there and it's not there anymore. Guess what had replaced it, Tamara? Guess what was there instead?
What?
You click on the website, it gives you an error, and then it's like it's got, the URL and then some stuff after URL. So I'm like, okay, let me go to the first part of the URL and see what's there. And it was a website. It was a website designed for gun lovers. For people that, love guns. It's like all of these links to go to this place to learn more about guns and that place to learn about guns. So, they got some good old boys on there with some long guns on the website. I'm like thinking, so it's gone from showing evidence that the Civil War was clearly about slavery to having these good old boys, like, some members of the Dukes of Hazzard on their website, with their long guns and shotguns and stuff. So I thought that was very ironic that it switched. And I think it switched because they realized, like, there's too many people that are finding this evidence because people are telling them this is where they can find it at. So they switched it. But this is my point. The Civil War started, the bloodiest war in American history. 750,000 at least Americans died in that war. And Lincoln knew in 1862 that the North was losing the war. It was clear. If you go back and you read the history of the Civil War and you watch documentaries about it, it was clear in 1862 that the South was kicking the North's butt. They were winning decisively. And what was happening as a result of that, you started having some of the European nations say, well, maybe we need to support the Confederate cause instead of the Union cause. The British were still salty about the Americans leaving to begin with. So they were leaning in that direction like, maybe we should give some money to the Confederates instead of to Lincoln. And, France was thinking the same. There were several European countries that were beginning to lean in that direction. So Lincoln said, man, I got to do something about this. So he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the whole game, because I'm going to issue this Emancipation Proclamation telling those southern states that I'm going to free all of the slaves that are in the states that are in rebellion. And that will change these nations that want to support the Confederacy to supporting us, because now you have a good reason to support us because we're doing the right thing. We're ending slavery, right? Now, these other countries that ended slavery years before, we were one of the last countries that end slavery. So now he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, what he called the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, September of 1862, warning that on January 1st, 1863, he will issue the real Emancipation Proclamation, issue this decree that will abolish slavery in the states that are in rebellion. But this is the thing I tell people. You have read about the Emancipation Proclamation, and just tell me this, Tamara. You've read about it in school, right? You've heard about it. Have you ever read it? The actual document? Have you read the text of the Emancipation Proclamation?
No, I have not.
I can guarantee 99.9% of Americans have never read the text of it, because if you read the text, you will discover that it didn't free all of the slaves. This is the thing about it. So when the Civil War started, there were 15 states that were still slaving states. 2 of those states that didn't join the Confederacy wrote letters of secession but never followed through. That was Missouri and Kentucky. They wrote letters of secession, but they never seceded and joined the Confederacy. Maryland and Delaware never wrote letters of secession. They wanted to remain part of the Union, so they were slaves. So there were 4 slaving states that never joined the Confederacy, and they're known in history as the border states: Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. They still had slavery on the books, and they didn't join the Confederacy. So during the time that Lincoln was writing this Emancipation Proclamation, if you read it, you'll see that he didn't include freeing the slaves in Maryland, in Delaware, in Kentucky, in Missouri, or in Tennessee either, because Tennessee was controlled by the Union Army at the time. And then places in Louisiana, places in Virginia, where the Union Army was in control of that territory, the slaves weren't freed in those places either. So I tell people, me being who I am, I went back and did the math. And I found that about 21% of the enslaved population in the U.S. was excluded from inclusion in the Emancipation Proclamation intentionally. It's not like Lincoln accidentally said it. And you know the main reason he did it, Tamara, why he didn't include those states?
Why didn't he?
I always say, follow the money. Follow the money. Because those 4 states told Lincoln that, listen, if you free our slaves, you are going to have to pay us the loss of the value of our property. You're going to have to give us reparations. That's what those 4 states said. You got to give us reparations for the loss of that property. And Lincoln was like, man, I'm fighting a war. I ain't got money to pay y'all no reparations. Now, they didn't call it that, but that's literally what it was. Listen, reparations is repairing the damage, right? So the damage of white people owning black people, and all of a sudden the next day you can't own them, you lose all of their property. Somebody has to repair their damage, and the only way to repair it is to give you money. Lincoln said, I don't have the money. Those 4 states stayed a part of the Union, and people don't realize this. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't apply to those folks, and literally it wasn't until December of 1865, with the passage of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, that the people that were enslaved in those states legally gained their freedom. So that's one of those tricks they play on us in school. They tell you a little bit of the truth, but they don't tell you the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So me being the person that I am, I dig into these things. So guess what happens? You fought this ugly war. 750,000 people die. The Republican Party begins to pass, the Reconstruction Acts. They give black men the right to vote. They give black people citizenship rights. They end slavery with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, right? So these Reconstruction amendments, and we're told in history class, Reconstruction, was a time when blacks were elected, and they did a lot of wonderful things. The public education system that we take for granted, that was something that was expanded by the Republican Party, particularly blacks in the Republican Party who joined Congress and the state houses around the country during the 1860s and 1870s. They created the system that allows everybody to have free access to public schools, right? That was because black people listen, for hundreds of years, y'all haven't even allowed us to learn to read and write. We want to expand the ability of people to have access to public education, but not just us. Everybody, because there was a boatload of white people that were illiterate too. We never talk about that. The number of white people who had never been to school and were illiterate. So they expanded that. They created the system we take for granted where you can get free public education. So there were a lot of benefits, but of course it ended And people will tell you it ended, you watch movies like The Birth of a Nation, the first really kind of blockbuster movie in American history was this black and white film in 1915, which showed that, the black people in Congress was in there drinking and cavorting and doing all kinds of stuff. And they were the reason the country was going down the toilet. And it took the Ku Klux Klan to come in and save the country from these radical black Republicans, as they called them, right? So that's the story that's been told for a long period of time. But what literally happened is that's not what happened. During the whole time that Reconstruction was going on, when they tell us it was wonderful because of these amendments and black men getting the right to vote on it, what they don't tell you is over the period of Reconstruction, white people were murdering black people like it was going out of style. And it wasn't just the Ku Klux Klan. It was regular, average, everyday white Americans beating, killing black people, murdering them in the most vicious, violent way you can imagine, raping black women, raping black girls, destroying black businesses, burning down black schools all across the South, right? These people were not, the people that used to own us, Tamara, was not suddenly going to wake up and say, okay, let's treat these people the way they deserve to be treated. Let's treat them the way we treat each other. They said, no, we're going to treat them the same way we treated them when they were enslaved. And so, we were told that, the federal troops were there to protect black people and protect them from this violence. That's nonsense. It was not a lot of federal troops there. And in a lot of instances, they didn't do nothing. There was one instance where I think it was in Mississippi. There was a violent uprising about to happen where white people were threatening to kill a bunch of black people in this one community. And the governor asked, the president, Andrew Johnson said, Mr. President, you got to send some troops here to protect this black community because they're going to destroy this black community. They're going to kill people. They're going to destroy their homes, businesses, schools, whatever. We need help. And President Johnson was like, no, you good. You're good. We don't need to send nobody. You can handle it. You're the governor. You can handle it. And guess what? The governor couldn't handle it. And so they ended up killing, dozens of black people, destroying homes, business, all this stuff. And then President Johnson's like, oh, man, maybe I should have sent some troops to help. So the fact that they tell us in school that the troops were there to protect, they weren't always there. And there's estimates that at least 50,000 black people were murdered during Reconstruction, Tamara. 50,000. When we hear about lynchings and stuff and how, 5,000 people were lynched, that is nothing compared to the number of black people that were killed during Reconstruction when supposedly the Northern troops were there to protect us. So the reality is that Republican Party was, supporting black candidates. But guess what? This is what started to happen. This is when the Republican Party flipped. So the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, the party that wasn't against slavery. They were against the expansion of slavery. And, when black men got the right to vote, every black person voted Republican Party, right? We were Republican voting folks, these black men, right? Because that was the party that was helping us, right? So guess what happens? The National Republican Party begins to realize that, the party supporting black causes, supporting these black elected officials, they start to have an impact in national elections. So people in New York, people in New Jersey, people in Pennsylvania, people in Michigan and Wisconsin, some of these other states are like, you know what? I think they're doing too much for black people. They bringing up too much stuff about black people and helping black people. I don't like that party anymore. So the Republican Party started losing northern elections because the Republican Party in the South was helping black people. So guess what happens? They turn their back on us. The disputed election, 1876, Samuel Tilden, Rutherford B. Hayes running for president. Neither one of them gets enough votes in the Electoral College to win. The House of Representatives debates for months who is going to be appointed president. And they appoint Rutherford B. Hayes because he said, I'll take the last of the northern troops out of the South. So guess what? He becomes president. He didn't win the election. He got less votes than Samuel Tilden got, but he became the president because of this silly electoral college system, which is, I could do a whole hour on just the electoral college and how it's the most ridiculous electoral system on the planet Earth. Think about this, Tamara. When you were in high school, did they have like prom queen, prom king elections in your school, right? Now, during those elections, if let's just say one girl got 10 more votes than the other girl, which one won the election?
If one got 10 more than the other one, then the one that got the most votes won the election.
Oh, okay. That's like democratic system, right? The majority wins, right? So every election, on the planet, from prom queen, prom king to presidents in every country, is determined by the person that gets the most votes wins. But in the US, it doesn't work that way. The Electoral College has allowed the loser to win on 4 different occasions. Think about this.
But here's what I think I understand, and here's where you'll have to, like, I know it's more to it, and I know that's we're so off topic, but I just want to kind of interject there that like states like California, where you are so highly populated, the answer to that is they want to make sure that that there's representation with elections, because there's higher concentrations of people in these states that have more votes in the Electoral College versus states that have less people.
Tamara, that's what people say, but that's not true. People forget the Electoral College was created in 1787. 1787, you didn't have these issues. The Electoral College system was set up so that the electorate, because this is what people don't understand. The Electoral College system was set up in such a way that the electors were not required to vote for the candidate that the people in that state voted for. They could change their votes if they chose. It's still allowed in some states. They can switch their vote. But this is my point. Tamara, listen. If you look at the numbers, the little states, a vote in a little state has more power than a vote in a big state. And it's supposed to be equal. Listen, it doesn't work. If the system was such a wonderful system, why is it that no other country on the planet Earth has adapted the Electoral College? A democracy means the person who gets the most votes, regardless of which states it's in, should win the election. Presidential elections be based on the popular vote. Every other election on the planet is based on the popular vote. There's no reason we should have electoral. Listen, I could do a whole hour about it because it's complicated. But the bottom line is that you have people that Hillary Clinton won 3.5 million more votes than Donald Trump in 2016, but she lost the election. That means 3.5 million more Americans wanted her to be president than Donald Trump.
So we're going to do a show on that one.
Yeah,
we're going to put a pin in that because I know that gets deep.
I bring that up because of this.
College.
So you had a white backlash because of the Republican Party doing stuff for Black people. So now those southern states, Mississippi, Alabama, others, disenfranchised Black men starting in the late 1800s, right? And so this white backlash, the Republican Party got white backlash from the North because they were supporting Black causes. So then the Republican Party said, listen, we are not going to support those Black candidates anymore. We're not going to support Black people being able to vote. So they switched and became a party that was no longer in support of Black people. The Democratic Party certainly was not in favor of Black people. So really from the late 1800s all the way through like the 1950s, the Republican and Democratic Party were in lockstep when it came to Black folks. Neither party was interested in doing much of anything to help Black people. And so that backlash due to the South losing the war was the first real backlash in American history. Then you had another backlash when Black people said, wait a minute, we were promised these rights in the Constitution and in the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, and we're not getting those rights. So the second backlash was the Civil Rights Movement backlash. When the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down, Tamara, people don't understand what happened. White people were not happy with the Brown versus Board of Education decision and said the schools should be integrated, right? And this is what happened. And state after state after state, states said, listen, the Supreme Court said we got to integrate the schools. We're not going to do it. Make us do it. Make us do it. And the Supreme Court really, it was Brown decision was two. The one was saying that the schools were illegally segregated. And the second was saying, okay, listen, you need to develop policies and practices that integrate the schools with all deliberate speed. That's the terminology the Supreme Court used. And that meant basically do it whenever you're ready to do it. But these southern states, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, said, we're not going to do it. Some states and some counties literally closed down their school districts so that they wouldn't have to abide by the terms of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. In some counties, they closed all of the public schools in the entire county for 5 years, Tamara. 5 years, no public schools are open. So guess what happens? That's part of the white backlash to the Brown decision. They close the public schools, but this is what they do. They still got money for education, public education. You know what they did with the money? That's why I always say follow the money. They took that money and they put it into a fund to open up private academies for white kids only. They ain't opened up no private academies for these black kids to go to school because the public schools were closed. White kids went into these private academies, and that's the first time in American history that people who didn't have a boatload of money could send their kids to a private school. You know, a lot of things are tied together that people don't realize. So you had this white backlash that allowed these white kids to keep going to school for those 4 or 5 years the schools were closed. Black kids being left out, not having access to education. And that was part of that backlash. And so in 1968, after we passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act to re-enfranchise all of those black men who have disenfranchised, all those black women that disenfranchised, and then the 1968 Federal Fair Housing Act, which said, you know, it's illegal to discriminate in housing. There was another white backlash. Nixon ran for president in 1968. And he did really well. I mean, he just won, you know, overwhelmingly, but he didn't win in the South, Tamara. The Republican Party was still losing because the Democratic Party was ruling the South. So Nixon's team decided, we got to do something different in 1972. We got to figure out a way to win those Southern states. So what they did, they came up with what they called the Southern strategy, where they said, listen, we can't be as openly racist as we've been in the past and say, you know, the N-word and all these other stuff. We got to come up with some new coded language to talk about black people without sounding like we're talking about black people, as if black people couldn't figure out the code. So they started talking about, you know, welfare cheats and, you know, stuff like that. And people knew that they were talking about black people. So this was how they said, we're going to win over those white voters in the South. We're going to get them to switch from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And from 1968 election, where Nixon did very poorly in the Southern states, to 1972, he won all of the Southern states in 1972, overwhelmingly. He went from having like 13% of the vote in Mississippi in 1968 to having like 75% of the vote in Mississippi in 1972. What changed was their message, the narrative changed. So this white backlash flipped the South to solidly Republican, which it is today. And we know that if you look at every presidential election since 1972, the only Democrat that's ever won a majority of the Southern states in the presidential election is Bill Clinton in 92 or 96. Because guess what? He was a Southerner. He was from Arkansas. Every other Democrat has done very poorly in Southern states. So the Southern states are very heavily Republican states. And, you know, some states, Georgia, for instance, North Carolina, some of those states have been kind of hit and miss. It's very close. But for the most part, the Republicans are going to win Mississippi. They're going to win Alabama. It's like no question in those states. But that's why they were pushing so hard in Georgia and in North Carolina and even in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania and Arizona to make sure that they put policies and practices in place to make sure that a certain party has advantages over the others. So they put in things like voter ID laws. They put in, you know, an emphasis on felon disenfranchisement laws. This is what people don't know. They talk about Jim Crow died in the 60s, right? But one of the vestiges of Jim Crow were these felon disenfranchisement laws, which said if you have a felony conviction, you can't vote, right? In some states, you can't vote for the rest of your life. In other states, you know, you have to wait until after you're what they call off paper. So your probation, parole, supervised release ends, then you can vote. And in some states, even after that ends, you have to petition the governor to reinstate you as a legal voter in the state, right? So what happens is that was part of the white backlash saying, listen, we're going to limit the number of black people that can vote. And in Florida, they put it on the ballot. They said, let's let the citizens of Florida decide. And the citizens of Florida overwhelmingly said felons should have the right to vote. And okay. It sounded wonderful. Everybody was celebrating. Yay, we won, we won. And then the state legislature in Florida and the governor said, okay, yeah. But we're going to change the rules a little bit, though. This is what they do. They change the rules in the middle of the game. Okay, you can vote. However, if you still have fines or restitution that you haven't finished paying, you can't vote until you finish paying those fines or restitution. This is what people, you know, you watch Law and Order and you see somebody in court, 7 years in prison. They never tell you 7 years in prison plus $10,000 in fines and restitution to the victims of your crime. They never include that part, fines and restitution that you have to pay to the victims of your crime. So when you're in prison and you work in the prison laundry and they paying you 17 cents an hour, they taking that 17 cents an hour that you're making and they're paying your fines and restitutions while you're in prison. You're not getting that money to put into, to buy, the stuff that you need, soap and toothbrushes and stuff. They literally taking that money and making you pay it. So when you get out of prison in Florida, even though the state overwhelmingly, the resident of Florida said they should be allowed to vote, they switched the rules and they changed it so that no, these people can't vote because they still owe fines. They still owe restitution to those victims' families. They got to pay that off because they haven't finished their punishment until they do that. So now all those people that thought they were going to be able to vote in 2020, Tamara, found out most of them couldn't vote because, man, they still owe fines and restitutions. And they're too poor. Listen, when you get out of prison, you're not going to be able to get a good job for the most part. You're going to be struggling mightily. So now these people who thought they could vote couldn't vote. So these are the ways that they switched the rules. And this is all part of the white backlash. Whenever we have some progress made, there's always this very level backlash in the 1950s and 60s, violent Ku Klux Klan police officers beating the living daylights out of Black people. And I tell people that what you saw on January 6th, people forget that those people were intended to kill members of Congress on January 6th. They were literally intending on killing members of Congress. And then people forget that before that, just several months before that, shortly before the election, that people had planned to kidnap the governor of Michigan, hold a mock trial, and then execute her. These people are out there, Tamara, and I'm telling people, listen, when we look at what happens in the elections in 2022, but more importantly in 2024 elections, Americans better watch out. They better watch out because this white backlash has always been directed specifically at Black people and white people, that small number of white people that were supporting us. This current backlash is going to be an attack on white people in a much larger way than there ever was before. So you're going to see some really crazy stuff happen in 2022, 2024 elections that America hasn't seen before. And this is when the white backlash has the unintended consequences of hurting a bunch of white people too. As long as it's hurting Black people, it's okay. But now that it's going to start hurting white people, we're going to see some whole new things happen. So I always say that, listen, if we pay attention and we let history tell us some lessons about things that have happened in the past, we can anticipate these things coming. I told people before the election in 2020, I said, listen, this was going to happen. Donald Trump will lose the election, and then he'll come back in 2024, and he'll probably win. And people looked at me and said, Reggie, you crazy. There's no way. He ain't. No way. No way. Right? He got 74 million votes. Donald Trump got 74 million votes. That's the second most votes ever in a U.S. presidential election. You know what number one was on that list? Joe Biden got 81 million votes. So Donald Trump literally got more votes than any American presidential candidate in history other than the man that defeated him, Joe Biden. And if it wasn't for some courageous people in Arizona and Georgia that said there was no voting irregularities, and they said that, Joe Biden won these states, if those people hadn't had the courage that they had under a great deal of pressure and threats, they would have given those states to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump would still be president. So be careful what you ask for when it comes to this. I've always said this to white people as I travel around the country talking to people. I'm like, listen, y'all have been victimized by some of the white backlash against Black people. Y'all just don't recognize it. You don't realize that in many cases, you are going to be punished because they're trying to punish Black people. I'll give you a perfect example. Social Security Act, unemployment insurance, passed in 1935. They put a stipulation in that said if you're a domestic worker or farm worker, you're not eligible to participate in Social Security. Now, people don't know this. They just think it applied to everybody, but it didn't. And they didn't fix that until the 1950s. So guess what? There was a whole lot of white people that was farm workers too. Now, they weren't domestic workers like we were, like my grandmother was, and many other family members were, domestic workers. But it hurt a lot of white people, poor white people. They weren't eligible for Social Security, but it was primarily designed to hurt Black people. And they didn't fix it for almost an entire generation. So be careful what you ask for when you are supporting, these efforts that are related to the white backlash, because you may be some of that collateral damage as a white person, and people don't see it, Tamara.
I think a lot of white people they see it and they know it, and they don't know what to do about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I think there's some truth to that, but I think that they see it and they know it, but they don't understand the depths of it. They don't understand how deep it. Now, listen, as people of color, we understand the depths that people will go to because we've been the victims of the depths that people will go to. This is what I was telling my wife this morning. I said, these people are using Malcolm X's philosophy by any means necessary. They have adapted that philosophy. They said, we're going to get whatever it is we want by any means necessary. If we got to go in and pay people to go into school board meetings and complain about what they're teaching in schools, and we got to pay people and raise money to support these efforts, then we're going to do that. All of these school board meetings that people have been in there complaining about stuff, if you follow the money, you'll see that the money for these campaigns are coming from billionaires that have supported the GOP for their entire lives. So it's always something deeper behind it that people don't necessarily see. And I've heard this from white people, what you said, I don't know what to do about it, Reggie. You know, what can we do about it, Reggie? I'm like, listen, dude, you got a brain in your head, figure it out. You know more about the white community than I do. You live in that community. You know the people you need to talk to. You know the people whose minds you need to change. I can't give you a recipe. Look, we're not making chocolate chip cookies here. This is the real world we're living in. You have to figure it out. I wrote an article about this. I said, listen, white people that are woke white people that have been supporters of Black folks, you know, in over the last several years, they say that, listen, you know, what can we do? They're asking people like me, what can we do? I'm like, listen, man, I don't live in this little 99% all white community you live in. I don't know the details of what's going on in there politically or otherwise. You live there. You know. You got to figure that out. I can't tell you what to work in your community. I know what to work in the community I live in because I know my community really well, but I can't tell you the specifics of what you need to do in your community. You're going to have to put on your thinking cap and figure it out. And that's where people are saying, well, I don't know what to do. And when they say that I don't know what to do, this is the message they're really sending to me, is that I'm not going to do anything. I don't know what to do. So instead of figuring it out, thinking about it, talking to people from their community about what they do, they said, well, I can't figure out what to do, Reggie. So you end up doing nothing. That doesn't help us. It doesn't help us.
Oh, I'm muted. Mr. Reggie, I told you, he comes to us every third Saturday. It has been such a pleasure to have him in 2021. Hopefully we're going to continue to have him in 2022, but he has committed, y'all, to our surprise to you this morning. Our surprise. I told you I had a surprise. We have 2022, the lecture series, Reparations Sunday, y'all. If you're not following this movement, please do. Let me remove this banner real quick so you can see. Reparations Sunday, y'all. So here's the surprise. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Here's the surprise. Mr. Reggie is going to teach the teacher. All of us who are part of this reparations movement, we are teachers. Those pastors that are following the Reparations Sunday initiative, they're teachers. And Mr. Reggie is going to teach the teacher on our road to reparations, y'all. So it is scheduled for this coming January. We have a 5-part series. I'm going to let Mr. Reggie break them down and tell you what each part is about. But we have a 5-part series. Mr. Reggie, you want to jump in and tell them about each series?
Yeah, absolutely, Tamara. So we're going to take each month, the first 5 months of the year, to talk about specific ways that Black people's lives have been challenged and devalued in this country. So the first month is going to be kind of an introduction. We're going to look at American history from 1619 to 1865 and how those challenges of being enslaved for those 246 years impacted us and devalued our lives. And then we're going to look at what happened after slavery ended from 1866 up until today, the ways that our lives have been devalued in that way. And this is the history that you didn't learn in history class, right? So we can come back in February and talk about how the legal system, how our laws have helped devalue the lives of Black people. And then the second lesson in that month will be about politics, how politics has played a role. And this is why when I talk to people about the Electoral College, I think it's important for people. And listen, I want to come back on your show, Tamara, and do a whole hour on the Electoral College, because I'm gonna do the math for you and your audience that nobody does. People talking about, oh, the big states versus the little states in California. I'm gonna prove that argument wrong by doing the math for you all, because I've already done the math, so I already know. So anyway, March, we're gonna come back and talk about how science has devalued Black lives, and we're gonna talk about the science of race, how race as an idea came to be. It's not even real. It's fake. Race doesn't exist biologically. There are no genes for race. Right? They don't exist, but it was created as a way to justify the fact that the only people you could legally enslave in the U.S. were Black people from Africa and Native Americans. And then we're going to talk about how medicine, we're going to talk about how Black people were used as cadavers in medical schools around the country, how they literally buried a Black person, and 6 hours later, they went to the cemetery and dug that Black person's body up and sold it to, a medical school to be used as a cadaver for all of these people practicing medicine, right? We're going to talk about, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. We're going to talk about those things. We're going to come back in April. We're going to talk about the criminal justice system, because to me, the criminal justice system in America, which started with a system of policing, which came out of slave patrols, the system worked a very specific way, but it started to change in the 1960s. So we're going to talk about the traditional criminal justice system in the first session. The second session, we're going to talk about what happened in the 60s when we started to fight a war on drugs, a war on crime, and how that led to us having 2.2 million people incarcerated on any given day in American history. Everything changed in the 60s. And then in May, we're going to talk about the economic system. We're going to talk about what slavery did for this country, how slavery not only benefited those slaving states, those people that owned Black people, it benefited a lot of people that never owned any Black people. It benefited the U.S. economy. Capitalism developed right alongside the transatlantic slave trade and enslaving the Black people in Canada, United States, Mexico, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Barbados, Brazil, all of these countries. We're going to talk about how that system really was beneficial to a lot of people that never, when people say, well, my family never owned any slaves. I'm like, it doesn't matter. You benefited by being a white person because of slavery, because first of all, you couldn't be enslaved, but there were all of these economic benefits. And then we're going to talk about the post-slavery economic system, when Black people who used to be the personal property of white people, and they didn't want to, damage their property by killing us. After slavery ended, and they didn't own our bodies anymore, our bodies were no longer valuable to them. And they went on an orgy of killing Black people during Reconstruction, thousands and thousands of spectacle lynchings where Black people were murdered, publicly tortured and murdered. All these things, anti-Black race riots, where they went in like they did in Tulsa and destroyed the entire Black community, killed hundreds of Black people. So we're going to talk about those systems of the economy and how once we were no longer somebody's property, our value changed and the U.S. economy changed. And all of those states that benefited from slavery found a new way to have a new type of economy without the free labor of Black folks.
Go to the website, everybody. This is your Christmas gift, reparationsunday.com. Go to the website, reparationsunday.com. Click on the lecture series and it's there. There is an early bird Christmas special. Go over there now and check it out. There's a price decrease for the Christmas holidays. We'll go up to our regular price. And then if you just want to do month to month, or you just want to listen to certain series, that option is available too. But this is our learning. We have 5 months, y'all. 5 months of learning, teaching. We have to be able to give people reasons why. Mr. Reggie, someone put it in the chat that you come with data and facts, and that's how we're going to get this. That's how we're going to get our reparations. We can't be all emotional. We got to come with data, facts, and some real historical context. So Mr. Reggie is going to teach us, all of us, how to have these conversations on our road to reparations. Mr. Reggie, it is always a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. I'm going to let you go and get on the ClubHouse app. ClubHouse family, Mr. Reggie is going to come over there and do a Q&A. We're going to talk it up with him over there. So ClubHouse, stay tuned, Mr. Reggie. I'm going to give you a minute to go over to ClubHouse as I close out the broadcast. But any parting words?
You know, nothing other than this, Tamara. Listen, the evidence to support reparations is clearly there. A lot of breadcrumbs were left by racist white people in American history. The evidence is there. It's just been hidden from us. We know where to find it at. Then we can use it, and we can make the arguments that make it clear to everybody that obviously reparations are due.
Receipts in these political streets, as I would say.
Yep.
Those are the receipts.
Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Reggie, go ahead and hop on the Clubhouse. We're coming over there, Clubhouse, for just a few minutes, and I'm going to close out the broadcast. I want to thank you, everybody, for joining me every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on all the social media, on YouTube, on Facebook. Still locked out of my personal page, y'all, but we can see it on the Tamara for Georgia page, on Twitter, y'all. Thank you for joining me. I see you, Clubhouse. We're coming over there in just a few minutes, but I am Tamara Shealey. Every week we give voice to issues, activists, and activism. Please support the broadcast, y'all. I'm consistent, y'all. Consistent. This is our own media, independent media. We have to tell our own truths because they will never tell it for us. This is where we get our word out. This is where we learn. This is where we do the work. So please support the broadcast. That's at TamaraShealey.com. I am, of course, your candidate to the United States Senate. And I don't care where you are in these United States. I am your U.S. Senator. We're taking a bold agenda to Washington. We have centered reparations at the top. We ain't playing. We know why we're going, and we know what we want while we're there. And we're going to play politics. We're going to play this game, y'all. Go to the website and support TamaraForGeorgia.com. This is the holiday season. I'm asking you to please, y'all, support this campaign to the U.S. Senate. Again, we are working alongside churches in the reparations movement. You saw Mr. Reggie is going to be teaching us, teaching teachers, teaching preachers. They need this information. If they're going to talk about this in the pulpit, they need some historical data, some context. They need to be able to have this, say all of this in such a way that the parishioners can receive it. So Mr. Reggie is teaching us, teaching teachers, and teaching preachers. Y'all go to the website, reparationssunday.com. Go ahead, sign up, be a part of this training lecture series in 2022. 5 months. Y'all know that was strategic. That's God. 5 months. We got 5 months until this election, and 5 months of learning and teaching and sharing and making our way to Washington, our road to reparations, y'all. And again, I work alongside the commission to study reparations here in Georgia. HB 541 is activists, y'all. We are trying to get reparations where we can, shedding the light on it. So hb541.net, go to the website. This is a commission to study the impact of slavery here in Georgia. It is in the Georgia legislature in 2022. We need all hands on deck. Everything is pointed at reparations and our fight for this justice claim, y'all. You can find me on Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the ClubHouse app, White Women for Reparations. There are a lot of white women, y'all, that follow, that are supportive, that are committed. Let's be in this fight together, y'all. White Women for Reparations, Tuesday nights on the ClubHouse app, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then on Thursday nights on the ClubHouse app, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. White women, Black women, let's talk. These are the hard conversations. And we go there, y'all. We go all the way there. And this is how we heal. This is how we win. This is how we get to Washington. This is how we get our reparations, y'all. Again, we are in the holiday season, Polish and Politics. Go to the website, have some fun fundraisers, y'all. Fundraisers. Go to the website, Polish and Politics, on the Tamara for Georgia website. Get your campaign swag. Y'all. Got my little mug right here. Get your campaign swag on the Tamara for Georgia website. Fundraisers. Again, I am Tamara Shealey. I'm going to come over to the ClubHouse app for just a few minutes. Mr. Reggie is going to join us. So if you can join us over there just for some Q&A as we prepare to move into the Teach the Teachers lecture series with Reparations Sunday, y'all. We got work to do. 5 months. All hands on deck. Y'all have a great week and happy holidays to you and yours.
when we come to Washington in this campaign, we're coming to get our check. Young prodigies. Get out. Free.
Reparations, Martin said we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud, 1, 2, mic check. Cream, cash rules everything around me. Dream, my legacy, you can't stop me. Coming for our 40 acres, ain't y'all 40 in our paper.
Kicking the door, coming for our 40 acres and more. Our 6.4 trillion. Miss that no, we fought the Civil War. We came from the poor.
Start from the bottom, we still on the floor. We pray to the Lord.
Amen.
Picking the cotton, our fingers are sore.
Straight out the underground, escaping from slavery. The only cemeteries that we had were the trees. Watching our bodies while they blew in the breeze. Niggas in the north side to get free.
That way came from slavery. Where's all the marijuana shit owes me? Put her head on the dope, but the world won't scheme. Stick to the north side to get free.
Reparations, Martin said we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud, 1, 2, mic check. Cream, cash rules everything around me. Dream, my legacy, you can't stop me. Coming for our 40 acres, ain't y'all 40 in our
Look,
paper.
we taking them back. Putting Pettis Bridge on the map. Police came with the strap. That some niggas buddy no cap. Speaking of cap, Kaepernick taking knees at the flag. Where my justice at? We built this nation, better give me them rap. All fat, just imagine a little bit of gasoline. 4 girls got bombed back in 63.
400 years and we still ain't free. Our rise, we rise, take a knee.
Kaepernick.
Reparations, Martin said we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud, 1, 2, mic check. Cream, cash rules everything around me. Dream, my legacy, you can't stop me.
Coming for our 40 acres, ain't y'all 40 and our paper.
We stuck in the trap with no shoes, trying to pull up bootstraps. Increasing the gap. Wealth got bigger, so we had to adapt. Discriminated cause we black. I know it worth more than I know it's a fact. They tryna feed scraps. Strike me on board so we can't come back.
30 years ago on April 19, Yusef and Triremi chemical read.
If it happened to them, think it happened to me. Screaming, I'm ready 5 to a free.
Prodigies.
Reparations, Martin